Well, you mentioned the success of
Yeah.
the ITV debates. Obviously, BBC and Sky also hosted their own debates.
Yes.
What did you feel about their output? Did you think it matched up to ITV's, and was their agenda different?
It's a very funny thing that in a way they reflected what they were unexpectedly. And ITV, I think, genuinely reflected ITV at its best. I mean, we can do dreadful programmes as well, and we do things. I look at Jeremy Kyle and I think, oh my God, I wish that wasn't on ITV. I look at the X Factor and Coronation Street and I think I'm so proud that they're on ITV as well as News at 10. Sky is glitzy, a bit superficial, and a bit sort of wham bam, thank you ma'am television news. Adam is a brilliant political editor, but is not first and foremost an anchor man. That's, I mean, he's a political editor. He's like Tom Bradbury or Nick Robinson. But it was, to me, it was just a little bit glitzy. It was a little bit New Kid on the Block, and the stunt with the Daily Telegraph newspaper to try and trip Nick up. I thought was misconceived. And the BBC, I thought, was consummate, polished performance, and David is one of the best political anchors in the business. Question Time is one of my favourite programmes. But I thought, oddly enough, for the BBC, they took just 2 steps back into history rather than 1, and it became almost too sombre. I think they could have just inched forward a little bit. But I was joking with at the dinner you were talking about where we got the award, I was joking with David, and he said, oh, you guys at ITV missed a trick. And I said, what? And he said, because you didn't do any branding. There was no ITV branding all over the place. And if you look back at the tapes, on the BBC debate, there's BBC writ large under each of the podium. So, that's 1-0 to the Beeb on the branding, which it should have been the other way around.
Change of subject.
Yeah.
In your career, this very esteemed career, you've had the privilege, I believe you were anchoring live at the Berlin Wall.
Yes.
You've had the Lockerbie bombing, which you presented through. In terms of these big stories, do you feel a pressure in terms of you're the voice of the nation, you're breaking the story? What's your mind process going into presenting on such big global events?
Somebody once said that television news is the first draft of history. I suppose it's true of newspapers as well, but we have the pictures, or we have a lot more pictures. And I think that it is only on reflection that you realise how incredibly important it was to be one of the voices that tried to explain to folk the significance of the Berlin Wall coming down in the context of the end of communism in Europe, in the context of the end of the Cold War and the reduction of a threat of a thermonuclear war between East and West. Ditto the debates, that this was the first time that millions of people could watch on television these 3 guys who wanted to be Prime Minister and make their own minds up. And at the other end of the scale is Lockerbie and the Shuttle Challenger, where these were just extraordinary tragedies. One was an act of international terrorism, one was a technical cock-up, but you're trying to guide people gently through something which is emotionally soul-destroying. When you're doing it, there's something deep down in your mind and psyche that tells you this matters, don't screw it up, don't muck about. But you don't think before you utter each word, is it, as le mot juste, the absolutely right word. It's in your DNA. And if it's not in your DNA, you shouldn't be doing it. And so some of the cleverest men and women in my business are the ones who say, yes, you're going to be an anchor, and no, you're not.
You mentioned earlier you're a big fan of writing as well as
Yes.
I'm a big fan of your blogs. I think you're a good political commentator, and what you say is very potent. Do you feel in particular, like in terms of your career, is presenting something you want to stick towards, or could you see yourself going more into print or more into documentary making?
Not so much documentary making, funnily enough. I think that's easier to answer, because I think documentaries are either the possessions of brilliant cinematographers. I mean, I love some of the I include David Attenborough's work, for example, in documentary. I just adore anything that's got David Attenborough's name at the end of it, whether it's the oceans or the skies or the biosphere. And the investigative stuff that people do, Julie Etchingham's Mob on the Tonight programme. But I'm not like that. I don't have the patience for it, and I'm not a probing, investigative kind of journalist. I'm more of a commentator kind of journalist, and I think the word anchor man as opposed to newsreader, newscaster is perfect. I like, if I know I'm doing a programme and I've got Bill Neely and I've got Johnny Irvine and I've got Tom Bradby as my correspondents, I think, it's like a general who's got the best brigade commanders available, and you're just there kind of easing them into it and just trying to make it all connect beautifully. That I really love, and that's what I'd like to do. But the key determinant, and I think is the answer to your question, is that we, and the BBC and Sky, are legally obliged and morally very happy to be impartial. So I would hope that if you watch the evening news or news at 10, you'd have no idea what I personally think about Mr. Cameron or Mr. Miliband or Mr. Clegg or any of them in terms of their politics. I can tell you, I think he's a nice guy. I don't really know him very much yet, but I hope to get to know him and what have you. But you couldn't draw from that any conclusion as to whether I was pro-coalition or within the coalition, Labour, Conservative or Lib Dem, or pro-Labour. And that's right and proper, and I don't want that to be the case. And I believe firmly in the journalism that says on the one hand and on the other hand. Now, it's up to you, viewer, to make your mind up. In writing, you can, as it were, come out like Superman. Clark Kent goes into the telephone box and comes out as Superman, and you then know what's making him tick. And I look forward to that moment, but I would like to keep doing what I'm doing for as long as these good people here are happy to employ me doing it. But when they get to the stage and they think, it's time to make a change, or we want to bring somebody else in, or we've had enough of you, then I would very much like to write. And I would like to write for something like the Independent newspaper, which is my favourite national daily, and as it were, come out politically. But I'm very happy not to do that whilst I'm still gainfully employed by ITN.
Obviously, the Independent, the Views paper.
Yeah, that's one of the, and people like Steve Richards and John Rentoul and Hamish McRae is my all-time pin-up columnist, because he brings together economics and politics, which is going right back to when I was at University of Bristol, is what I do and what I love to this day. And Hamish is the best in the business.
You mentioned that level of impartiality,
Yeah.
Which obviously the balance you strive to put out as your output. Do you sometimes find it hard on the story you feel passionate about to
No, it's almost a defence mechanism, and I think it strengthens your journalism, because journalism as we do it, and as it is done by the best practitioners, is not about opinion. That's why Simon Kellner in The Independent is so clever in having the Views paper and the newspaper. It's separate. So if you look at the student protest, or the cuts in government spending generally, or the war in Afghanistan, or the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq war, any of these big subjects, it is our job to say these are the views and opinions that are going on out there. Lord Goldsmith, the former Attorney General, said X, Tony Blair said Y, General Mike Jackson said Z, and what have you. I'm not giving it any weighting. It's up to you, dear friend, dear viewer, dear reader, to make your minds up about that. And I'm very comfortable with that, and that's what I like doing most, journalism of gathering as much information as possible, putting it into a digestible form that allows people then to make their own minds up. And so the elections are the best example of that, where we spend 4 or 5 weeks putting out a menu, and then at the end of the day they order steak and kidney pie, or they order fish and chips, and that's fabulous. With a column, you cross into a different territory, you're on a different planet in a different language, and you say, here are the arguments about the cuts in public expenditure, and I, Hamish McRae, am going to tell you why I think it's absolutely brilliant, or I, Anatole Kaletsky in the Times, are going to tell you why I think it's absolutely bonkers. I look forward to being in that territory, but I'm very comfortable in the territory that I am at the moment.